Giving me the opportunity. So we will talk about the top 11 mistakes we make in the management of hypertension. We all know hypertension affects billions of people, and only in 20% of patients we are able to control blood pressure, 1 in 5. So 80% have uncontrolled blood pressure. And as Dr. Aziz mentioned, in Pakistan it's even lower. So that's why we will focus on the under treatment part of the hypertension. What are the common mistakes we make? I think not everyone makes all the mistakes, but we do all make some mistakes, and we will go over the mistakes. We know hypertension could cause cardiovascular disease and could also increase the mortality, and even 20/10 increase in blood pressure could double the risk of cardiovascular disease. And the risk of cardiovascular disease because of hypertension and death is more common in lower income countries, low middle income and low income countries, which makes it even more valuable for us not to make these mistakes. So starting from the very basics, the mistake number one, not accurately measuring the blood pressure. It seems very simple that you just have to check the blood pressure and treat it, but we do all make so many mistakes while checking the blood pressure. And this is one of the slides in which if you're measuring the blood pressure, you need to make sure that you have waited 5 to 10 minutes, you have emptied your bladder, you have not eaten anything immediately before that, like coffee or something, and your back is supported, your feet are supported on the ground, and your arm is also supported and at the heart level. And so many simple things, and sometimes commonly we don't, when patients come to us, we are unable to make their arm naked, and we just check the blood pressure on top of their shirt and all that. That also leads to inaccurate blood pressure checking, and once you have not checked the blood pressure correctly, it's not easy to control it. The second mistake, we, in addition to making mistake in terms of not checking the blood pressure correctly, is inadequate patient education. Many times what we end up doing, we end up giving the prescription to the patient and they come back and they have stopped taking the medication. We don't educate them about the diet, about the for how long they have to take the medication, which is usually forever, as well as the exercise. So there are so many mistakes we make, and if we do spend some time with them in terms of what blood pressure exactly is and how do we control it, it would be much better for the patient as well as for the control of blood pressure. Patient non-compliance, this also stems from the previous slide in which we do not educate them well. So once we don't educate them well, they are non-compliant, and the non-compliance could be in many forms. They could be taking your blood pressure medication, but they're still taking a lot of sodium. They keep on gaining weight, they're not losing weight, excessive alcohol consumption. So even though they are taking the medication, if we would have educated them well, they would not make all these mistakes. Failure to take your medication as prescribed, they will discontinue the medication, inadequate follow-up. And there are different ways you could tell that if someone is non-compliant. Not every time they will tell you, oh, I'm not taking the medication. Sometimes there would be certain clues. For example, if you have prescribed them a beta blocker and their heart rate is still more than 80, so either they are not taking or you're giving them an inadequate dose. Similarly, you have given them hydrochlorothiazide and their uric acid level is 3.5. So there are so many clues you could get from their history, like they won't tell you exact name and shapes of the medication. They will miss the appointment. They will talk about the cost. They will talk about the side effects. So all these clues would tell you that they're not taking the treatment adequately. So you can't control blood pressure if someone is non-compliant with the treatment. And non-compliance is also on the physician part as well. So which we will talk after going over this mistake number 4. Still in Pakistan, in 2025, many small centers you go and they'll give you sublingual medication, which has totally been banned in rest of the world. So sublingual nifedipine, even Caputin, could suddenly decrease your blood pressure, and it has not been recommended. So we should not make this mistake anymore. Physician non-compliance. So the way everyone thinks about blood pressure is that it's like there are 5, 6 different drugs, and you could choose and pick any one of them. It's not like that. It's not like the game is Russian roulette and you have 6 chambers and 1 bullet and winner takes it all. You can't just roll the dice and say out of these 6 medication, a group of medication, I'll pick up one. No, you can't do that, because if you do that, you are not using the compelling indication. You will maybe giving a patient a drug which is not suitable for them, or you have given them a drug, another drug would have been more suitable for them. So that could lead to complications. For example, if you have not given beta blocker to someone who has ischemic heart disease, that would not be fair to them. So physician non-compliance has many shapes and forms. The most significant of them is inadequate drug regimen. There was a study done in which they have taken 436 patients in an hypertension clinic, and 21% of them had refractory hypertension. So out of these 92 patients, in 83 of these patients, they were able to identify what was the cause of resistant hypertension, why their blood pressure was not well controlled. And the number one cause in almost 60% of the patient was suboptimal therapy, inadequate medication, and not taking the diuretics. So this is the most common cause in terms of physician non-compliance. Why do I say physician non-compliance? Because we as a physician were unable to give them an adequate drug regimen, which could have led to the control of blood pressure. Mistake number 6, ignoring the compelling indication, turning a blind eye towards compelling indication. So all these are compelling indication. Compelling indication is when you're treating the blood pressure, but you're also treating, there is another indication to use the same drug. For example, in diabetic kidney disease, we all know ACE and ARB are indicated. So if we don't use them, then we are not utilizing the first line drug, and we are ignoring the compelling indication, which is a mistake. You would be able to control blood pressure, but you would not be able to decrease the risk of progression of chronic kidney disease and proteinuria. So here, most of the people, they would be on beta blocker or alpha blocker when it's not only indicated. We all know beta blockers are only indicated when there is ischemic heart disease or atrial fibrillation or heart failure. We already went over this. I would not waste any time on this. Physician inertia. What is physician inertia? This is another mistake. So your blood pressure is not at target, but you don't want to do anything. You cannot, or you are not intensifying the treatment. And this is because of many factors. Either you don't know how to do that, or you are not interested, or you are burned out, or a patient is already on 5, 6 different drugs and you don't know where to go. So you just end up telling them, okay, lose some weight, take less salt, and you don't end up taking any measures in which you could adequately control their blood pressure. So whenever you are dealing with someone who has poorly controlled hypertension, so you need to sit back and relax and reassess the situation, make sure they're not taking too much salt, they don't have a sleep apnea, they're not using salicylates, they are not on suboptimal therapy, there is no secondary cause, they're taking twice a day drug. Many drugs which are promoted to be once a day drug actually works better if you take them twice a day. You have ruled out white coat hypertension, you have taken care of the non-compliance, and then you are dealing with the true resistant hypertension. So all this is from resistant, RSI. So this is one of the nice mnemonics. If you go through all this, you would be able to come up with at least any possible cause which is leading to not being able to control blood pressure very well. So secondary cause is very important. Sometimes this could be your uncontrolled hypertension, hidden culprit, and all these are secondary causes. The most common secondary cause of hypertension is chronic kidney disease, renal parenchymal disease. We all talk about pheochromocytoma and hyperaldosteronism and renal artery stenosis. When in majority of the patient, the most common secondary cause is renal parenchymal disease, chronic kidney disease. Patient might have a polycystic kidney disease, no albuminuria, no other signs. That doesn't mean they can't have underlying chronic kidney disease as a cause of hypertension. So whenever you're dealing with someone with hypertension, you must make sure and rule out underlying chronic kidney disease. And then there is a huge list, starting from aldosteronism, renal artery stenosis, sleep apnea is very common as a secondary cause. 70 to 80% of people could have underlying sleep apnea, and simple history and sleep study would do it. You apply CPAP, their blood pressure would be better controlled. And then there are some uncommon causes. One thing I would like to bring your attention to is masked hypertension. So it's opposite of white coat hypertension. White coat hypertension is higher in the office, and this is opposite. So you would miss it. Do you know 10% of population with hypertension have masked hypertension? So their blood pressure is excellent when they come to you, but blood pressure is elevated at home, exactly opposite of white coat hypertension. So the evidence would be from the end organ damage and all that. So you should not miss that. And the only way you could check for that is by home blood pressure monitoring. It could be ambulatory blood pressure monitoring or just home blood pressure monitoring. Mistake number 9, not using a diuretic. As Professor Aziz have mentioned and shown it beautifully, the mechanism, how it works. So this was exactly the same slide he was mentioning. One stimulates another one, and if you block that and you take care of the fluid retention, it works the best. So 70 to 90% of the blood pressure could be controlled with one pill. In fact, the definition of resistant hypertension currently includes all these 3 medications. If you are using adequate amount of calcium channel blocker, ACE/ARB, and a diuretic, and your blood pressure is not controlled, that's resistant hypertension. This is also, he has shown that slide. So the effect multiplies 5 times if you are adding a newer agent rather than doubling the dose of the same agent. And mistake number 10, you don't want to overdo it too. There is no ACCORD trial and SPRINT trial have shown there is no benefit of intensive control of blood pressure either. So you don't want to bring it down to less than 120/80. Similarly, for hypertensive crisis, you don't want to decrease it quite significantly down suddenly. Maybe 10 to 15% is enough. Similarly, you don't want to combine ACE inhibitor and ARB because there would be more hyperkalemia and acute kidney injury. And last mistake, my favorite, stopping renal angiotensin system inhibitors. We stop it too soon. Either we don't use it. According to one study, only 12% of the Pakistani population where it has been indicated ACE and ARB are being used. So we don't use it, period. If we use it, we stop it too early. So the creatinine goes up a little bit and we stop it. In fact, 20 to 30% rise in creatinine, a decrease in GFR is not only acceptable, it's desirable. This is how it works. So if there is slight rise in creatinine, you just need to explain to the patient. What I do to my patient, I explain to them before I start it. I tell them, I'm going to give you a medication. This will increase your creatinine a little bit. And I tell them I am basically slowing down your GFR so that it works for a longer period of time. So I already warn them. So next time when they see elevated creatinine, they already know I have told them. And then the potassium goes up a little bit, we stop it. There is no reason to stop it. Look at the other factors, the diet, the metabolic acidosis. Maybe you could add a diuretic. Maybe you could decrease the dose. If someone is taking 160 milligram of valsartan and potassium is 5.5, so why don't you decrease it to 80 milligram? Why do you have to all of a sudden stop it? Why don't you correct their metabolic acidosis to bicarb of 22 rather than keeping it at 80? So you could increase, you could correct the acidosis. And then there are so many drugs. Like in some of my patients, I use Kayexalate to bring down their potassium so that they could keep on getting the potential benefit of these drugs. And then as soon as patients' GFR goes to less than 15, or 20, we end up stopping it. There is no data. In fact, cardiovascular mortality significantly increases. Chronic kidney disease is equivalent of cardiovascular disease. So all the risk factors of cardiovascular disease significantly increases because of chronic kidney disease. So there is no point of stopping ACE and ARB even when the GFR is 5 and 10. Even if you have stopped it, once the patient go back on dialysis, for example, then you need to restart it. So utilize it as often as you can and try to deal with the side effects. The only side effect could be like if the creatinine increase is more than 30% or the potassium is so resistant and patient is so non-compliant. In that situation, you might end up decreasing the dose or stopping it. Thank you very much.